Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be the first part of 2 videos with the same name. In this first one, I will be showing how the quantum leap into 5D has begun through a discussion of what's been happening out in the world, and in particular, the events that have occurred in the U.S. starting on November 3rd. Huge events that have ramifications beyond what most people might be aware of, and then how we can most effectively weather the chaos it's all causing. And in the second one I'll be posting later, I'll be focusing more on the challenges that are occurring in our personal lives due to the monumental leap in consciousness that we're all taking as individuals. And then what we can do to alleviate the stress and the fear and the anxiety in that process. So, the first thing I want to say in this video is that if you're feeling discouraged or confused and perhaps frightened by recent violent events that have occurred in the U.S. and everything else that's been going on in the world over the last year, fear not. We are still very firmly on a positive timeline into the 5th dimension. It just may not look or feel like it at this point. If you've been following what I've been saying and writing for a long time, you can understand that what we're experiencing now is the true descent into the transitional times that prophecies have foretold for many thousands of years, as humanity makes the enormous leap from the 3rd dimension into the 5th dimension. And we've known that these transitional times were going to be dark, tumultuous, probably fearful, because of how immense an evolutionary leap of consciousness this was going to be for humanity. And yet the intensity of these times may still be taking you by surprise, and it's understandable because until now, it's been just kind of a story about humanity would be making this leap into a whole new consciousness, right? It all sounded wonderful and exciting, but now it's becoming much more real, isn't it? We're in the middle of that process of intense transformation at this point, and it is chaotic and tumultuous and highly uncertain. And so it's understandable if you're feeling fearful. Although the transitional time actually began back in December of 2012, when the Earth and humanity shifted into the 4th dimension, last year was when we really began the descent into the darkest period of these times, when the whole event known as the pandemic began. But this year ahead of us, especially the first few months, is already promising to be even more challenging, with the immense polarization and division that's been occurring due to what began on November 3rd in the U.S. It's truly time to buckle up our seatbelts now, because it is a huge evolutionary leap we are beginning to take. And a lot of things, both in the outer world and within ourselves, need to break apart, need to collapse, and disappear in the process because they cannot go with us where we are headed. And that's why it is so chaotic and tumultuous at this point. As I've been saying for a while, there are powerful high-frequency waves of light that have been flooding the planet in the last few years. And they are in the process of doing 2 different things. First, they are disrupting all old low-frequency patterns that have developed during humanity's long sojourn through the 3rd dimension. It's perhaps most obvious when you look out at the world at this point. What now exists out there does need to unravel and break down and collapse because it doesn't resonate with 5th dimensional energy. I mean, we kind of know this. And specifically, what needs to collapse are the old, corrupt systems of control on the planet that have existed for actually thousands of years in order to allow for the emergence of new ones to come in, those based in justice and harmony and peace and compassion for all. And these waves of light are currently flushing to the surface all the corruption, the dark patterns of manipulation and control that have been below the surface for thousands of years. It's like a cleanse, when toxins are flushed to the surface. It all needs to be seen and resolved and cleaned up and then released, because none of it can go with us to the fifth dimension. And we can also see the same dynamic happening on the microcosm level within each one of us, right? All dysfunctional patterns that we've developed stemming from traumas we've experienced, negative emotions, misconceptions, misunderstandings, and woundings, all of it's being flushed to the surface now. They're coming up out of our unconscious in order to be seen and dealt with and then released. And yet, on the other hand, simultaneously, these waves of light are also bringing with them immense energies of joy and love and peace that we can tune into. And there's also a great sense of freedom and empowerment with these waves, and you may be experiencing this at times. Many of us have been feeling this on and off, especially since December 21st, when the solstice and the Great Conjunction occurred. A huge shift occurred at that time. And at times, for no reason at all, you might just feel swept up in great optimism and joy, despite the very dark events that have been occurring, especially in the last week or so. And these waves of light are also assisting us in healing much more quickly now. And you may have noticed this too. And even out in the world, wonderful things are happening, although most people can't see them yet. But groups of people are connecting. New projects are being born. New technology is being released. A new earth is being envisioned and created. Just one surprising example of this is just recently a group of Black Lives Matter people joined with a group of Make America Great Again people to protest mandated vaccinations. Who would have thought such two groups could come together like this? It can really bring hope into the divisiveness that these groups generally have had with each other. And there are also other groups who are totally focused on creating positive solutions in the world, such as the organizations like Thrive On. You can, I think I'm going to put their link down below, along with Ubiquity University. And there are many others, people who are really devoted to creating a new earth. So, although things currently look chaotic and frightening, and may continue to look this way for a while, we can become aware of these kinds of indications that the shift is happening, that the Great Awakening is indeed occurring. And I've got to say, I'm really excited about it and about these times we're entering, as scary as they may be in some ways. I feel as if I've been waiting for them for such a long time, even eons of time. And I'm just glad they're finally here, because what I see is that we're finally at the point where a cosmic rebirth of humanity can begin happening. It's clear to me that we are finally transitioning into the Aquarian age now, a new earth, the pathway toward the fifth dimension. It's extremely chaotic, but that's because what we're experiencing is not only a birth process, it's also a death process. It's really messy, like birth and death generally are. And we're going to be seeing some radical changes taking place in the next few years due to this. Some of them may initially look awful and scary, but they will eventually be obviously beneficial for humanity as a whole and for the earth. And some of these changes will be incredibly wonderful. Among other things, there is some amazing new technology that is going to be released, even in this next year, that will completely change our ability to optimize our health and even reverse our aging. and other technology that will transform how we live in our daily lives. It's really, really exciting. So as I say, we are securely on a positive timeline now toward the fifth dimension, to the golden age. How long it will take before we truly enter it, and how rocky the ride will be, depends on how many people can wake up in the process of what's starting to happen now, and how many people like us can hold steady in our spiritual wisdom, our love and compassion, and our steadfastness through the rough times ahead. But these are the times we're here for, right? Those of us who focus on light and love and spiritual awakening, we Ascension Lightworkers, we're here to help give birth to an entirely new awakened humanity and world. And it's very exciting. It's truly time for us to step up now and begin our spiritual missions in whatever way we can. But how can we do this when there is so much disruption happening in the world and so much restriction we're all experiencing due to the lockdown situation, especially with all the unrest and even violence that has been occurring in this last week? Well, we are all different in what we're here to do in the outward sense. There are some light workers who are here to be activists of one kind or another. Others are what could be called frequency holders. But no matter how we feel moved to act out in the world or not, we are all here to maintain a consciousness of light and peace and unity as much as possible. And what this includes, of course, is doing our best to stay out of the extreme polarization around the whole subject of what I'm going to be calling the U.S. event. I will continue to call it this, that thing that happened back on November 3rd, in order to avoid censorship, which is something, in case you're not aware of it, that has been occurring recently on a massive scale in the media, on online sites, on all social media platforms, and on YouTube. Greater and greater censorship is occurring. It's almost impossible today to get alternative news that's different from the mainstream narrative. So as I say, I'll be calling what happened on November 3rd the U.S. event. And I'll be referring to the man who's currently still the U.S. president as Mr. T, and the other candidate as JB. Just to be safe here. At any rate, what I'm saying is that it's important for us to stay out of polarization about this whole situation. And it's so easy to get caught up in it. I know. People are either violently pro or anti Mr. T. And as we all know, this division of people's opinions has caused such disruption, even within families and between couples and between old friends. It's just really heartbreaking for some people. And what we need to remember is that polarization like this is one of the major hallmarks of the third dimension. It has a very low frequency. But I know it can be really hard if you fervently believe Mr. T is the good guy, or if you know for certain that he is crazy and needs to go now, no matter how he's gotten rid of. And yet it's important for us to try to stay above the fray and not be too attached to one opinion or the other, or to get locked into a fixed position about any of this. Because if we do, we're just adding to the tremendous division of hatred and fear and contempt and lack of compassion that are already raging out there in the world. Now, at the same time, I say this not as an encouragement to just tune out all that's occurring around the U.S. event, or to try to bypass it through attempting to simply focus on love and light and unity. Of course, it is important to hold our focus on love and light and unity, But it's also important to keep aware of the events as they unfold, because whatever ends up happening is going to affect the entire world. And also, it'll affect the trajectory that humanity as a whole is going to take in the next few years. It's an immensely important event. And in order for us to be really effective in accomplishing our spiritual mission and assisting humanity to make the quantum leap in consciousness, we do need to stay abreast of what is happening so we can assist people in what they are experiencing and reacting to. So one thing I want to say is that it's important to try to grasp as much information as possible about what has really been going on and researching as much as possible online to see what the mainstream news has not been reporting, because there is a lot of it. As you may have realized, there is a very tightly controlled narrative that the mainstream press has given us about the U.S. event and the events that have occurred since. And as I say, a great deal of censorship has occurred, a really scary amount, actually. Now, I want to make it clear here. I am not speaking as a Democrat or a Republican. I don't have a political agenda. I don't really relate to either party. Actually, I haven't for quite a while. I'm just wishing to bring information to you that I believe is extremely important, and it hasn't been in the mainstream news, or if it has, it's been greatly distorted. This is to help balance what has been missing, especially for those who have only followed the mainstream news. Because what's been missing is a whole lot of activity behind the scenes that has only been revealed on alternative sites online by investigative journalists, insiders, and whistleblowers that I've been following closely over the last number of weeks. Just about all of whom have now been effectively banned by the mainstream news corporations and the tech corporations, because the narrative given by these alternative voices has been seriously undercutting their own narrative that they've been giving out. So what I'm saying here is this is not about politics. The issues go much, much deeper, as I'll be discussing here. There is a profound battle occurring, and what we've been witnessing on the political scene is just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm not trying to convince you of anything. You can make your own decisions after hearing what I have to say. I just wish to inform you of certain things in case you haven't been aware of them, so that you can be prepared if things should suddenly take you by surprise. In fact, things have already begun to occur that will be somewhat shocking. And I've kept waiting to post this YouTube, because moment by moment things are occurring in a certain direction, and I wanted to alert you to the most up-to-date information to prepare you. But at some point I just had to get this out. So let me begin kind of at the beginning, because I think this is necessary. Something you may not be aware of if you have only been following the mainstream news is, like I say, that you've been getting a very narrow and controlled narrative, one that has been fervently anti-Mr. T for over 5 years now. It's important to realize that 92% of the mainstream media are owned by just 6 mega corporations with a set agenda that matches that of the big tech corporations, who own all of the social media outlets. And all of them are adamantly anti-Mr. T. Now, I also got to say at this point, I am not personally a Mr. T lover. I've never really liked him. I have felt embarrassed that he's been our president. I don't agree with certain things he's done. If anything, I've always been a real liberal, even radical in my youth. And yet, I'm not a Mr. T hater either. As I say, I find polarizing about him stems from such a low frequency. It just hurts my heart whenever I hear anyone adamantly doing this. It doesn't matter from which side they're arguing on. I try to stay neutral about him. And yet, I have done much research over these past weeks, reading and listening to probably dozens of the investigative journalists and whistleblowers about what has occurred during the U.S. event. And I was amazed to find that there is hard evidence that massive fraud actually did happen, just as Mr. T has been claiming, and on many different levels. It's really shocking what occurred. Now, I can't say I know everything, or that what I'm telling you here is absolutely true. I mean, there is, of course, some fake news on alternative sites on the internet also. You got to be discriminating and keep checking to see who seems credible or not. But what I'll be telling you here is what I have read and heard over many weeks now from different sources that I'm pretty much trusting at this point. Those who seem to be sincerely trying to get the truth out since the U.S. event. And many of them are nonpartisan. They just analyze the data. They're not going for one candidate or the other. But what I've learned about the fraud is that Mr. T actually did win by a landslide. An unbelievable number of votes were turned to JB. And the primary way of turning the vote was through rigged voting machines that turned hundreds of thousands of votes from Mr. T to JB. And many of these machines have now been confiscated, and international teams of experts have been examining them and explaining how the machines were able to do it. There are even instructions that have been read online that come with the machines that tell you how to turn the votes. I mean, it's really amazing. But the main thing that their analysis shows is that there was definite major foreign interference in the U.S. event. The voting machines were connected to computers in China, in Spain, Germany, Pakistan, Italy, and they were manipulated from within those countries. And recently, it was discovered that the Vatican also used military satellites to pass information from the U.S. voting machines to China and to South America and Europe. So this is huge. But then on top of all this information, there are also thousands of signed affidavits by election workers who vouch for the fraud that took place in a lot of different ways. And there are even some videos that clearly show it. And some of these people have since received death threats for signing the affidavits. So this really tells you something. And yet, even after all this hard evidence has been gathered and presented in courts and attempted to be presented in Congress on the 6th, of course, they never really followed through in presenting this information after what happened, the vote still came out for JB. So you may think, well, that proves the fraud didn't take place after all. Or what did really isn't significant enough to change the vote. But in actuality, it doesn't prove that. It simply shows the extent of corruption that exists in the courts, like there is in so many of the other governmental institutions, and how many people have been blackmailed and have received threats for themselves and to their families if they don't do certain things. There are many stories like this from people who report how they've been blackmailed, how they really can't talk much about it, it's much too risky. Assassinations have occurred. Remember Seth Rich a few years ago? Again, this may sound far-fetched, that I'm sounding like a Mr. T lover. I totally get it. But hang in here with me. I'm really not, nor am I a conspiracy theorist. as the mainstream press would tell you I am. Believe me, I have done tons of research over a number of years on conspiracies in the world, and I know many of them to be real. In fact, I've written a whole book about this. And I'll get more into this research in a moment, but what I have discovered is that there are actual conspiracies that do exist, and they involve a very small global group of elite kinds of people, and that they have been heavily involved in this last U.S. event, especially involving the voting machines and the computers and other countries that manipulated the votes. At any rate, the point here is that there are many who are aware of the clear evidence of the massive fraud that took place, and they say the U.S. event is not yet over. And no matter what happens, it doesn't seem likely that everyone is just going to accept whatever happens at the end without protest. There are too many people on both sides of the battle to just let things go or let them settle. And we need to be prepared for further attempts on both sides as they continue their efforts to win the final battle. And really, the question does remain, whether we happen to like Mr. T or not, do we just let this kind of fraud happen? Do we not care about the vote of the American people? Do we just throw out the Constitution? And do we not care about the immense widespread censorship of all opinions that happen to counter that of the mainstream media? Isn't this one of the hallmarks of a dictatorship? But even in sharing all of this about the U.S. event, I haven't yet really touched on the core of the battle that is going on. And what I'll be saying here is based on what I've learned through the enormous amount of research I've done over the last 8 years or so, not just on the events surrounding the U.S. event. And it's that this battle really is not between Mr. T and JB at all. They are just the outer face of this battle, the face shown to the public. The real battle is actually between two worldwide groups that have been battling behind the scenes now for actually many decades now. The first group is a small but very powerful group of wealthy families who have essentially kept humanity in a state of virtual slavery through manipulation and control for a very long time. They've been called a lot of different names, the global elite, the Illuminati, the cabal, the deep state, the globalists, even sometimes the Satanists, because many of them do actually worship Satan, which is a whole story into itself. But anyway, they consist of families like the royal families, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the banking industry, large corporations, and certain powerful people in the Vatican. They have no party affiliation, no national affiliation, only an affiliation and a loyalty to themselves. And they believe themselves to be naturally superior to the rest of humanity, and that humanity is simply here to serve them. This is real, and we know this because there are members of these families who have stepped outside of the families and have reported this kind of stuff and a lot of other information, and they've put their lives in jeopardy by doing so. But anyway, these elites are worldwide, although they have most thoroughly infiltrated all institutions within the United States over the last century or so. They've effectively infiltrated both of the electoral parties, our governments, the three-letter agencies, our military, our social institutions, pharmaceutical companies, the media, the entertainment industry, and our educational institutions. I mean, they are everywhere. And it is this group of powerful people who are wanting to start what they've called the New World Order, which you've probably heard about, under which they would enact the Great Reset, which actually entails their eventual complete takeover of the planet on all levels. And this is no exaggeration. It's really, really serious. Again, this sounds like conspiracy theory, but just try to stay open about it. Because, like I say, I have done so much research on this. There are so many books out there that aren't even available in the U.S., but they're out there in the world. People who have written about these people. And if you do some research, you can discover, among other things, that this elite group has started all major wars in the last few centuries, and then financed both sides of these wars. They like keeping us in war. They were responsible for 9/11 and for Fukushima. They have arranged numerous assassinations, both the Kennedys and Martin Luther King among them. They have thriving businesses of drug and human trafficking. They have orchestrated and funded numerous false flag mass shootings in the U.S. They've orchestrated the entire lockdown situation in order to collapse the global economy. They are planning to inoculate as many people as possible with those injections that contain highly dangerous microchips in them. They have blackmailed many, many politicians over the years with information that they have on them and threatened harm to them if they don't do what they're told to do. They've manipulated elections in many third world countries in the world, overturning governments, starting civil wars, and also to some degree manipulated the vote in past elections in the U.S. as well. And, as I say, they created the immense fraud in this last U.S. event. In addition, it's come to light that they likely created the false flag event at the Capitol. When Ashley Babbitt's so-called murder happened, reports say that she was actually a CIA operative, not a Mr. T supporter. And there's even evidence that she was not actually killed. There's a video that really demonstrates the falsity of both these claims, both that, she was a Mr. T supporter and that she died. Just watch it. I've posted it below. And there's at least one other video showing clearly that the demonstrators were not only easily allowed into the Capitol building, there was a guard actually guiding them into the building and leading them upstairs in order to wreak havoc. The CIA is well known for false flag events like this. It was all a pre-planned setup. I think it's important to really understand this. Again, if all this information is new to you, probably think it's conspiracy theory, and I totally understand. But again, this is what the mainstream media and the tech companies who own the social media want you to think, because they are owned by people who are part of this elite deep state group. It's not theory. The conspiracies are real. And as I say, there is just too much evidence out there about them, put out by credible journalists, insiders, and whistleblowers. The censorship has blocked a lot of the information at this point, but you can watch the videos that have survived on Brighteon and BitChute if you wish to check them out. There were many who were using Parler, but now I think Google has totally removed this platform. But you know what's amazing is that despite so much censorship occurring, some videos are still getting hundreds of thousands, even millions of views now. Increasing numbers of people are waking up, not trusting the mainstream media anymore. And it's not just the conservative, middle America type Republicans who love Trump kinds of people who are searching for this kind of news. Many intelligent, former liberal, highly conscious people are seeking the truth now, people who are concerned about what is really going on. At any rate, over the years, what I've been describing is the swamp that Mr. T has referred to. But it's important to understand that he is not the main one with this agenda. He's just the outer face of the second worldwide group that also exists behind the scenes that is battling the first group that I've just described. And these people are often referred to as the Positive Alliance. These people exist within different governments, intelligence agencies, and in the military across the world. And they have been fed up for years with these elites controlling the world. And they are determined to drain the swamp. They've actually been working on a plan to arrest the deep state players for many decades now, actually since the 60s, after the death of Kennedy. They just haven't been able to do it quite yet because so many of these people have still been in control of too many things. However, this is probably what's changing at this point. And I'll talk about that in a few moments. I just wanted to make it clear that this is the real battle that's been going on behind the scenes, behind all the circus that's been taking place around the U.S. event. The candidates have just been the players in the game that are apparent to the public. And in some ways, they have been a distraction for what's really been going on. And so it's important to be aware of this larger picture because at some point, whether soon or down the line, you're likely to be hearing about it from more official sources anyway, and you'll just have to take it in at that point. So you might as well consider all this stuff now and process it, make decisions about it, because then you'll be in a position to assist others around you down the line who will be in shock and despair when they hear it. At any rate, it's important to realize that the game is probably not over yet. Mr. T has a couple more cards to play, and in fact, from the latest report I've just received, he's already played them. You just won't see it in the mainstream news at this point. And the first one is, since he has tried the option of all the legal action he's tried in the courts without success, and now the mainstream news and online platforms won't allow him to speak to the public, he is now by law able to use the emergency broadcast system to send his messages out if necessary, which is, as I understand it, will come on everybody's cell phone. So that may be happening if necessary. So be alert to this. But meanwhile, the other card he is also by law now able to play, and evidently has already done so, is enacting what's called the Insurrection Act. And this enables the Positive Military Alliance people to begin a series of mass arrests that have actually been predicted for a number of years now due to many thousands of sealed indictments that have been accumulating across the U.S. for the last several years. And this is something you can check online. On an official U.S. website, you can see how many sealed indictments now exist in each state. Well, these indictments evidently contain charges of treason and espionage and murder, but also for crimes such as human trafficking, child trafficking, pedophilia, and actually much worse that I don't wish to mention here. But this is something we need to be ready for also because, according to many reports, some very prominent people in the government, past governments, and other well-known people are likely named in these indictments. And they're evidently starting now with some of the less prominent people and with deep state players overseas in other countries, such as Pakistan and Italy and Germany, but will, perhaps within the next week or so, arrest the others. Now, as I say, you won't see any of this on the mainstream news. Many of the owners of these corporations will also be included, but not yet. But some of the best reports of all this information come from a man in Britain that I have been following for years. And I find he has a great deal of integrity and is very spiritually aware. And he's also very well connected with the Positive Alliance. His name is Simon, and I'm going to spell his last name, P as in Paul, A-R-K-E-S. And I put his blog link below after the words, good blog to follow. Again, I'm being very careful here not to alert the search engines to censorship. There have also been reports from other credible insiders during these last few weeks, some of whom have said that the way that everything has been rolling out, both during and since the U.S. event, has actually been part of a sting operation designed to catch all those involved in the corruption around the U.S. event, including the judges, the electors who voted on December 14th, those in Congress who voted on the 6th, along with others who were involved in creating 9/11 and a number of other atrocities that have happened over the years. In addition, certain sources are saying that a ton of information has been given to the Alliance by Jeffrey E. I think you know who I mean. That's right, he's evidently still alive and has been spilling the beans, as has his girlfriend, Ms. Maxwell. And there are others who have also turned state's evidence. And just recently, a number of laptops have been confiscated from the Capitol, revealing all sorts of information about treasonous acts. So, to say the least, a lot is going on here with the Alliance's moves to make arrests at this point. But the globalists also probably have more cards up their sleeves to play as well. So who knows for sure what's going to happen with all this? There's just a lot going on, and it's not over yet. And so it's just good to be aware of it all so we can understand what's been happening and why in case the chaos increases. We want to be prepared because this is part of what we're all here to do, to help bring calm and understanding and light compassion to all people as this whole drama unfolds, however it ends up playing out. No matter which way it goes, there are going to be a lot of angry people, and civil unrest could become violent in certain areas of the U.S. It truly seems we are seeing perhaps the early stages of the total demise of our whole electoral system, perhaps to some extent our whole legal system, and perhaps even our entire governmental structure. But this is what I was saying earlier. If there is this much corruption and all these institutions, they will have to either be totally revamped at some point or maybe rebuilt from the ground up in order to resonate with the powerful new fifth-dimensional energies now streaming onto the planet. And this is what we will need to help guide people through. Most people are going to be in total shock and fear, not knowing what to do or how to handle their whole sense of reality that's just falling apart and how their feeling of safety has disappeared. If enough of us can stand strongly enough now in a consciousness of peace and harmony, we can maybe at least help the probable chaos ahead of us to just smooth out to a minimum. And maybe the inauguration of the president can just proceed relatively smoothly, whoever ends up finally getting in. And since the mass arrests do seem to have begun now, maybe we can assist people to handle this more smoothly too. As we know, consciousness creates reality. And our consciousness filled with light can be really, really powerful. Very importantly, if we can simply remember that all of this chaos going on at this point is part of the immense positive shift that's occurring, and that it will eventually lead us into the golden age of freedom and love and harmony, then we can continue on in relative peace and calm with what we're here to do. As I say, these are the times we're here for, to ride through these tumultuous events as humanity begins the quantum leap into a much higher consciousness, and to assist others in all the ways that we can using our own unique gifts and skills, and we all have them, and we all have wisdom and spiritual knowing. We need to stay above the fray and not get involved in the polarization. Somehow learn to live and fly above the chaos. You know, it's often been said that the greatest amount of change can happen during a crisis. And I think this is really true. There's also another saying from Ilya Prigogine, that seems apropos to the situation as well. And he said, when a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire disorderly array to a higher order of organization and function. Because this is what we need to do. We need to create small islands of coherence, of peace and love and harmony. And one way we can do this is by joining mass meditations. There's a group of people who do a lot of these, and they're really wonderful, and I link their URL below. Other things we can do is join forums that are gathering to promote peace and harmony. This is how we can come together and begin creating a positive future for humanity. We can keep visualizing it, keep feeling positive and optimistic, and act on our convictions, we can create it. So this is the end of part 1 on this subject of the quantum leap into 5D that I'm recording. And sometime soon I'll come out with part 2, which will focus on how this quantum leap is showing up in our personal lives and what we can do to make this leap on a smoother, more comfortable way, just however we can do it. So until then, my beloved fellow Ascension Lightworkers, I send you much love and many blessings.